With the most stacked fight card of all time taking place this weekend in UFC 300, I thought it would be fun to go through and rank every single fight on this card based on how excited I am for it. So I'm going to be basing my excitement around three different factors. The first one is just going to be how entertaining I think this fight is actually going to be. Is it a fun matchup? Is it stylistically interesting? The second one is going to be the competitiveness. So are these guys equally matched up, or does it seem like one fighter is just going to run through the other one? That definitely plays a factor. And then the third factor is going to be the skill level. So pretty much, is this like a high level fight between two top contenders? Is it two champions? Or is it two dudes maybe outside the top 15, the back end of the top 15? It could still be very exciting, but if you can combine all three things, a fun matchup, a competitive fight, and a high level fight, to me, those are the three things that make up a very exciting matchup. I'm also going to be splitting these matchups into tiers while also ranking them. And then I want to know down below in the comment section, what fights do you think should be higher, lower? Want to hear your guys' opinions, but let's just dive right into it. So we're going to start off in the legendary tier, and there's only one fight here. It's going to be Justin Gaethje taking on Max Holloway. I feel like this fight easily checks all three boxes. You have two of the most exciting fighters of all time. If you're taking the top 10 most exciting fighters in UFC history, both of these dudes are probably on there. This is expected to be a stand-up war. Gaethje has, the wrestling pedigree, but he really doesn't go to it. Max Holloway's really only gone to it in the Yair Rodriguez fight. So I think both these dudes are just going to go out there, stand and bang. And even though Max is coming up from 145, I still think this is going to be pretty competitive. I think earlier on, people were worried about Max. They thought it was going to be like Tony Ferguson Part 2. But I think the fact that he's coming in looking bigger than he did for the second Dustin Poirier fight, I think fans are starting to come around on this being a pretty competitive, close fight. And also, Max is just super durable. So even though Gaethje hits like a truck, he can put dudes out for sure, and he can put Max out. I think his durability could definitely come into play here. And then the skill level is pretty much as high as you can get. You have Max Holloway, a former featherweight champion, defended that belt multiple times. Justin Gaethje, the former interim lightweight champ, and has just been in the top 5 of this division pretty much since he stepped into the UFC. So that's my one legendary fight. It's tough to get a fight into this tier, but this one definitely deserves it. Now, pivoting into the elite tier, we're going to start it off with Alex Pereira taking on Jamal Hill. It looks like Jamal Hill wants this to be a stand-up fight, and I think the fans are the winners here if he actually follows through with that. If he's not going to go out there, wrestle Alex Pereira, this is going to be a fantastic fight because both these guys are great strikers. They're must-watch, and both these guys can end the fight at any point, right? If you told me this fight ended in 20 seconds, I wouldn't be shocked. They both have the power to put each other unconscious. I think pairing them together is going to be fireworks. The odds are close. Obviously, it's a high-level fight. It's for a UFC title, so I think that fight is very exciting also. And then the second and final fight in this tier is going to be Charles Oliveira taking on Arman Tsarukyan. This could end up being the number one contender fight. We'll see how things kind of shake out with the Holloway-Gaethje fight. But for Charles Oliveira, he's an all-time great at lightweight. Tsarukyan could be that potential all-time great. A lot of people are viewing him as the future of the division. And then just, in terms of how entertaining this fight should be, Charles Oliveira is just allergic to boring fights, especially since he went on his crazy run. Every fight is crazy. Every fight is chaotic. He's always going to bring it. Arman Tsarukyan may not be viewed as the most consistently entertaining fighter, but he's had some big knockouts. He's had some fun fights, and even in the ones that aren't super fun, where he kind of goes to his wrestling, racks up control time, kind of thinking of the Damir Ismagulov fight. I don't know if he can actually execute that against Oliveira just because of his submission threat. So I think Charles is going to bring the fight to him. I think it's going to be fun. It's obviously a high level with this potentially being a number one contender fight. And then I just think there are also some interesting stylistic questions. Is he going to take place on the feet? Is Arman going to respect the jiu-jitsu and submission game of Charles Oliveira? Or is he going to try to, exploit that? And maybe Charles has the opportunity to find a submission. So very, very interested in that matchup. Now, pivoting into the great tier, still some very, very fun fights. We're going to start it off with Yuri Prochazka taking on Alexander Rakic. Yuri Prochazka is another guy who is just allergic to boring fights. In his UFC career, he has 4 fights, 2 vicious knockouts over Dominic Reyes and Volkan Ozdemir, a submission win in the fight of the year over Glover Teixeira, and then he has a knockout loss to Pereira. So even in his loss, it was a fun fight. He had Pereira, somewhat hurt on the feet, ends up rushing in, gets finished, and then his 3 wins were just fantastic fights. This one looks like it's probably going to be a number one contender fight. You have Rakic coming off a torn ACL. I think the only thing that's potentially holding this fight back from being in the elite tier is that I think Rakic's probably best path to victory is to kind of rack up control time, slow this fight down on Yuri, which could lead to it not being super exciting. But outside of that, it's a high level fight. Yuri's obviously just an insanely fun fighter to watch. So I think this one does belong at the top of the great tier. Now the next matchup, I believe this fight's happening right before the Yuri fight. Aljamain Sterling taking on Calvin Kattar. This is a great clash of styles between a grappler versus a striker. We're going to see if Aljo can really implement his grappling to, stifle Calvin Kattar's striking game. I think it'll be interesting to see how Aljo looks up a weight class. That's adding some intrigue. How's Kattar going to look coming off a knee injury? He's been out for pretty much like a year and a half. And I think what also is fun about this fight is it feels very, very competitive. I mean, I feel like just a few days ago, the odds were literally like 50-50, minus 110 on both sides. I think maybe they've swung in favor of Aljo a little bit, but for the longest time, it seemed like it was pretty much a 50-50. Everyone had a different guy in this fight. 50% wanted Aljo, or 50% thought Aljo, 50% thought Kattar. I think that makes this one super entertaining. And it's obviously a high level. Aljo, former champ. Kattar trying to get into a top contender spot in the 145-pound division. Now, in the next fight, we're going up a weight class to lightweight with Jalen Turner taking on Renato Moicano. This was the last fight added to 300. I think it was a great way to kind of seal off this card. It's a very fun matchup. We have Turner and Moicano ranked 10 and 13 in the lightweight division. So maybe it's not like the number one contender fight, championship level skill level, but this lightweight division is very, very stacked. So if you're ranked 10 to 15, you are still an absolute monster if you're in the lightweight division. Jalen Turner, always exciting, has an 100% finish rate. He had that absolute war with Dan Hooker that I think got fight of the night, or actually that might have been the same card as Moreno Pantoja, so maybe not, but Jalen Turner, super dangerous on the feet, has some submissions also. Moicano has finished 5 of his last 6 wins. I think Jalen Turner is definitely going to want to keep this one standing. Moicano is going to want to impose his grappling, and there's probably going to be a pathway for Moicano to do that. We have seen Jalen Turner improve his takedown defense, but he still got controlled a little bit by Mateusz Gamrot. Moicano, I think, is definitely more dangerous on the ground in terms of actually capitalizing and finding a finish. So I think that'll be very interesting. I do really like this fight. And I really like the next one here with Sadiq Yusuff taking on Diego Lopes. Lopes has made a significant mark in the UFC despite only having 3 total fights. He arguably gave Movsar Evloev his toughest test, and it was a debut fight for Diego Lopes, and I believe he was coming in on short notice. So to really give Movsar Evloev problems on short notice is crazy impressive out of Diego Lopes. He's racked up back-to-back wins in the first 2 minutes of his last 2 fights. And then Sadiq Yusuff is a legit, test here for Diego Lopes. He's in the top 15. His only UFC losses are to Arnold Allen and Edson Barbosa. He's also coming off a super fun main event fight, a 5-rounder against Edson Barbosa. So I think, Sadiq Yusuff may be getting slept on here. I did pick Diego Lopes in my prediction video, but I think it's going to be close. I think it's going to be very competitive, and Diego Lopes could definitely end up being the future of this division. Now, the next matchup in the great tier is going to be Davison Figueiredo taking on Cody Garbrandt. I think this fight definitely checks the entertaining and high-level boxes in my excitement criteria. Both Figgy and Cody Garbrandt are always in absolute bangers for fights. They are both former champions, so definitely very high level. Cody Garbrandt a little bit removed to that, but I still think he has a lot of the skills he had when he became champion, had that masterclass over Dominic Cruz. The one thing where I think this fight kind of comes up short is I don't know if it's going to be super competitive. I could really see Figgy kind of cracking Cody's chin early on, and maybe it's an early finish. But Cody obviously has the power to put Figgy out. He's one of the hardest, if not the hardest hitter in this division. So if it does end up going longer, get into the second, third round, this fight probably could have been ranked higher, but the competitiveness is the one concern I have here with this matchup. And then the final fight in the great tier is going to be Holly Holm taking on Kayla Harrison. Now, this is another fight where I think the competitiveness might kind of hold it back, but that kind of just speaks to how dominant Kayla Harrison has been pre-UFC in the PFL, because Holly Holm as like a debut opponent is pretty high level, right? No one else is coming to the UFC and getting Holly Holm in their first fight. So if she does just run through her, that's just because Kayla Harrison is that good. I've wanted to see Kayla in the UFC. The dream matchup would be Amanda Nunes. Don't know if we're going to get that. But I think there's also some intrigue probably before the fight, more so than pretty much any other matchup here. And that's Kayla Harrison at the weigh-ins. How's she going to look hitting 135? I don't believe she's ever made that weight in her professional MMA career. At PFL, she fought as high as 155 pounds. So it is a pretty significant cut. Is that going to impact her performance, or is she just going to go out there and shred through Holly Holm like the odds makers are kind of suggesting here? And then the final tier here, the good fights. Like I said, there are no bad fights on this card. These are still very solid scraps put together by the UFC here. We're going to start off with Zhang Weili taking on Yan Xiaonan. I think competitiveness, just like the last two, is what's kind of holding this back. Individually, Zhang Weili and Yan Xiaonan are both very entertaining fighters. I just think when we're looking at these two, I feel like Zhang Weili is just on a different level. Yan Xiaonan obviously strives in the striking, on the feet. She's coming off a knockout win over Jessica Andrade. But I don't think Zhang Weili is just going to, stand out there and let Yan go to work on the feet. I think she's going to take her down. I think she's going to dominate her on the ground. It also just seems like this fight is a little bit misplaced on UFC 300. Not that it's not a good fight, but it just seems like this fight should be taking place in China. Chinese champion, Chinese challenger. Why is it in Vegas on UFC 300? I don't know. But the next good fight here is going to be Jessica Andrade taking on Marina Rodriguez. I think this is going to be a really good fight. I think this is really good matchmaking. I know there are a lot of people out there that were kind of hating on this matchup when it first got announced, but I mean, these are two very exciting women. They're probably just going to go out there, stand and bang. Both clearly want to just stay on the feet and strike. And they both have pretty solid power for strawweight. I mean, especially Jessica Andrade, probably the most powerful strawweight in the history of the division. I guess the one thing kind of holding this back would just be like the lack of stakes. Does this get one of them a number one contender spot? Probably not. I feel like that's got to be Tatiana Suarez. They both just seem a little bit distant from the title at this point, but I just think it's a fun fight, so it definitely belongs in the good tier. Then we're going to go with Bobby Green taking on Jim Miller. This is just another fight that I think is a really solid scrap. Jim Miller needed to be on this card, and I'm glad they found a fight for him. He's been on UFC 100, UFC 200, now UFC 300. That kind of longevity is crazy, especially the fact that he's actually been on a roll, 5-1 in his last 6 fights. All 5 of those have been finishes. I also like who they matched him up against. He got a solid name in Bobby Green, but it's also a competitive matchup. I thought there was a risk of them putting him up against like some young killer just to kind of, use him as like a platform piece for that guy. I'm glad they didn't do it. Even though Bobby Green's the favorite, he's not like a significant favorite. Now, obviously, this isn't going to be like the peak level of the lightweight division, but Bobby Green's always fun to watch. Jim Miller's been on a tear, like I said, and has been a serious finisher, which is something we hadn't seen earlier on in his career. So I still like that fight. And then the final fight here, I guess it's the last one ranked, but like I said, it's still in the good tier. It's Bo Nickel taking on Cody Brundage. I think some people didn't like this matchup. I think more people didn't like that it was on the main card. Personally, I don't really care. I don't think anyone's saying that like this fight is going to be better or more competitive than Yuri Prochazka, Alexander Rakic, or Sterling Cater, but they think Bo Nickel is like the next superstar, so they want to put him on that platform. I get it. I'm not hating. Honestly, more people are probably going to watch the featured prelim than this fight because it's actually on the pay-per-view. But there's just not a lot of suspense with this matchup. It seems like Bo Nickel's, just going to run through him. I know people want to see him vaulted into the top 15. I don't think it makes a ton of sense. If he's getting paid good money to kind of build up his career, he's only 5-0, so it's not crazy for someone in like their third UFC fight to be given Cody Brundage. I don't think Bo Nickel needs to rush it here, but like I said, it feels like we already know the result. Seems like Nickel's just going to run through him, probably in the first round. If it gets out of the first round, I'd be surprised. And so if I'm surprised that this fight's getting out of the first, it's probably not the most competitive matchup. Also not, the most high-level matchup. It definitely could be on Bo's side, but it does seem a little wild that Cody Brundage is like on that poster for the main event. When we look at all the other legends on this card, you got Figgy and Garbrandt as the curtain jerker, and then you see Cody Brundage's face up there on the main card. But it is what it is. This is trying to build Bo Nickel. I still think it'll be fun to watch Bo Nickel compete, but the competitiveness, the stakes, just not really there for this one. So that's going to wrap it up for, I believe, all 13 fights ranked. Let me know your guys' thoughts on this. What fights should be higher or lower? Which ones are you very excited about? Let me know down below. Also, if you haven't seen my prediction video, go check that one out. Talked about every single fight on this card. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.